Hey everyone, today we're diving into the ancient book of Exodus. We're going to look at two back-to-back encounters that paint this really fascinating and honestly kind of complex picture of how a community should relate to outsiders.
And it all really comes down to this one big question, right? Is the default a closed fist or an open hand? Hostility or hospitality? Now, the text we're looking at today, Exodus chapter 17 and 18, it doesn't just give you a simple one-size-fits-all answer. Instead, it gives us two totally different stories, placed right next to each other for a reason.
So let's get into our first encounter. And this one, well, it doesn't start with a conversation. It starts with a full-blown clash. This is the story of Israel's very first major conflict after that dramatic escape from Egypt.
So picture this. The Israelites are making their way through the desert. And then, completely out of the blue, they get ambushed. And what makes this so jarring is that the attackers, the Amalekites, are actually distant relatives. They're part of the same extended family tree. The text just presents this as a sudden, unprovoked, and really painful betrayal. Okay, so the strategy for this battle is, well, it's a pretty wild mix of the physical and the spiritual. You've got Joshua down in the valley leading a totally conventional fight. But the real action, the thing that turns the tide, is happening up on a hill. As long as Moses can keep his hands up, holding God's staff, Israel wins. But the second his arms get tired and drop, they start losing. It's this incredible image of human effort being completely tied to a connection with divine power.
So, a story like this is bound to bring up some pretty tough questions. I mean, if these are God's chosen people, fresh off a miracle rescue, why does he let them get thrown right into a brutal war?
And the text's answer is actually pretty clear. The big message here is that escaping one specific danger, slavery in Egypt, doesn't mean you get to escape the dangers of the world itself. It's not like they're in a protective bubble. This new community still has to figure out how to navigate a really messy world filled with conflict, just like everybody else.
Which, of course, leads to an even tougher question. If you're a people of God, shouldn't your response be different? Why meet violence with more violence?
You know, the way the text portrays this, it's almost like a grim necessity. It's suggesting that this is part of the deal of being an actual nation in the world. When you're attacked, what are you supposed to do? It's not presented as the ideal, but as a reflection of the complicated and often brutal reality of just trying to survive.
And then, just as we're wrestling with all that, the narrative takes this massive pivot. It's just so intentional. We go from a people who attack without reason to a person who simply listens to a story. We go from war and destruction to worship and fellowship. This contrast is everything.
And that brings us to story number 2, and to a man named Jethro. Now, he's also an outsider. He's a Midianite priest. Oh, and he also happens to be Moses' father-in-law.
So Jethro comes to visit the Israelite camp, and Moses tells him everything that's happened. But pay attention to how he tells the story. The text makes a point of saying Moses focuses on the goodness of what God did for Israel, the rescue, the liberation. He doesn't go on and on about the destruction of his enemies. He tells a story about salvation.
And Jethro's reaction to this story is just incredible. He doesn't feel threatened by it. He's not defensive. Instead, this outsider, this priest of another people, hears the story of Israel's God and is so moved that he makes this powerful declaration of faith. It's amazing.
And it isn't just words either. His actions immediately back it up. He rejoices with them, he blesses their God, he offers sacrifices, and then he does something really profound. He sits down and shares a sacred meal with Moses and the elders, an outsider brought right into the very heart of the community's spiritual life, eating with them in the presence of God.
So what are we supposed to do with these two totally opposite stories, one of total war, the other of total welcome? Well, together they reveal this really important principle for the community, this idea of having permeable boundaries.
Here's the big idea. It seems like the text is saying, look, on a national level, on a corporate level, relationships with other groups can get hostile. That's just the reality of the world, like we saw with Amalek. But that hostility doesn't lock the door to individuals. The story of Jethro shows that any single person, no matter where they come from, is invited to hear the story and become a part of the community.
In fact, the ancient text has a specific legal and social name for this kind of person, the Gir. And a Gir isn't just a tourist passing through. This is a resident alien, a foreigner who chooses to live their life among the Israelites, and they become a full-fledged member of the religious community.
And this was a two-way street, a genuine relationship. The Ger had the right to be a part of the most sacred community events and was protected by all the same laws. But they also had the same responsibilities as someone born an Israelite. They were fully woven into the life of the community, while, and this is super interesting, still keeping their original ethnic identity. Think about it, the text calls her Ruth the Moabite.
So you have to ask, why this model? Why not just have walls of steel, or no walls at all? And that really gets to the very purpose behind this whole structure.
It's this really incredible tension, right? The community needs boundaries, for sure. It has to have a distinct identity to know what it's all about. But those boundaries have to be permeable. They have to be crossable. Because the whole purpose of having that identity in the first place is to be a light that invites other people in.
So the main takeaway is this. The ideal being presented here isn't some big melting pot where everyone has to become exactly the same. No, it's a vision for a community with a really strong, clear sense of who it is, but with doors and windows that are wide open, inviting others to come in and become a full part of the story.
And that, of course, leaves us with a pretty big question for our own lives. Whether we're talking about countries, faith groups, or just our local neighborhoods, this ancient tension is very, very real. How do we build groups that have a strong identity and purpose, but without building up walls that just shut people out? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for exploring this with me.